Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sabbath School at Chapel Oaks Church. Beautiful morning in here. Going to be a little marginal outside today, a little rain, but that's okay because it's getting ready to prepare the ground for snow, for skiing, so life is going to be good soon. I hear a lot, let's see a lot of unanimity of the people sitting here shaking their heads going, I don't like snow. Sorry, we need to have snow. That's why God made winter for skiing, right? So anyway, good to see you all here. Good to have you here. And we're going to have a great time together talking about education and redemption this morning. So before we begin our lesson this morning, let's start with prayer. Let's bow our heads. Lord, thank you so much for Sabbath. Thank you for this, for the scriptures that you give us that we can dig into and spend a lifetime learning about what you have for us to learn. Every time we dig in, there's just more and more to learn, and it's just exciting to see what you're going to teach us this week. So we ask that you will bless us, keep us in your hands today as we study and as we learn. Open our hearts to the things that you want to teach us. In Jesus' name, amen. So just a couple of things to remember when you... If you have a comment, raise your hand. And August, who's, by the way, just a great compliment to our AV team, our TV team, everybody who's working so hard to make this work here and online as well. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, the AV people, the TV people, all that. So thank you so much. And this morning, August will be running our microphone. And just a couple of reminders: when you raise your hand, and August will come bring the mic to you. Don't grab the mic, and then make sure you have your mask on to protect you, protect August while you're talking during your comments. So. Thank you for that, and let's get started. So, Becky, would you start off reading for us? We want to start off, the lesson today is on education and redemption. So, redeeming from what? Because if you have to be redeemed, you have to be redeemed from something. And something bad happened, but before the bad happened, something good happened. And so we're going to start off with looking at Genesis 1, chapter, I think verse 26 to the end of the chapter, and it's about people in the beginning. What did God do to start this all off? And we want to have lots of good comments this morning, so something I'm going to be asking you about is this morning to comment on is, what do you think that it means that people were created in the image of God? Think about that. People were created in the image of God. What does that mean? We'll discuss that after Becky reads this first section in Genesis chapter 1.
Genesis 1, verses 26 to 31. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and the animals that scurry along the ground." Then God said, "Look, I've given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth, and all the fruit trees for your food. And I have given every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, and everything that has life." And that is what happened. Then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day.
Great, thank you, Becky. So, Becky, by the way, read from the New Living Translation. If you don't have this one, this is one really worth picking up because we've really been blessed in our Bible study. This last year I gotta read my Bible through this year, and so I picked this translation up. And in fact, this was actually a gift from Becky. Yep, gift from Becky last Christmas. And I said, I'm going to read this through this year. And it was just a really cool, neat blessing, and with a really cool translation and easy to read and fun, but accurate. So anyway, New Living Translation, I'd recommend it really strongly. So God said, let us make human beings in what? In our image, right? In our image, okay? And he said, in our image, to be like us. So after, with King James says, after our likeness. So to be like us. What does that mean? What does it mean to be created in God's image? Okay, so we've got Lyle and we've got Bill. So Bill, go ahead. You're right there.
Well, we don't want to assume that being in the image of God or his likeness means that we're to be equal to God. That's not possible, and that's not the purpose of the teaching. Like the reflection of a diamond in a mirror, the reflection is not equal to the diamond. And so we're told here we're to be a likeness and a reflection of who God is, but we can never be equal to God. And that's kind of what the Catholic Church teaches. That, well, if and that's what the devil told Adam and Eve, you be God yourself. And they kind of bought into that, and we want to avoid that implication at all that we could ever be equal to God. Sanctification is not for the purpose of bringing us so we can be equal to God. We always come to God in Jesus Christ and through his name, and only God is holy, it tells us in Revelation. Our holiness is relative to him through Christ. God only is inherently holy. We're never inherently holy, and we need to get that very clear in our minds.
Okay, August. I think Lyle has a comment. So Bill talked about what the image of God is not. Let's talk about what the image of God is. So what do you think, Lyle?
I agree with what Bill was saying. To be created in the image of God, I think about God, his love. And so to be created in the image of God would be to create an image of love. And to love God supremely and to love everybody else impartially as our neighbor, as ourselves.
Okay, so that's a great thing. So we're going to kind of hone in on that a little bit. Okay, so he talks about God being love, and so how we treat each other tells us whether or not we're an image of God. Now I've had this marvelous privilege for getting close to 50 years. Okay, in 2 years, less than 2 years, a year and 3/4, Becky and I are going to be married 50 years. Okay, we got married when we were 2, just so you know, in case you wondered why. I wish. So anyway, I have had the privilege of being married to somebody who shows love to me every day, mostly when I don't deserve it, which is pretty much every day. So for 50 years, she's loved me whether or not I deserved it. And I think that I've learned more about what God's love is like through being with my wife for this time than I could have ever learned from anyone else, or learned from reading, or learned from, because that, to extend what Lyle is saying is how we treat each other that shows God. One of the disadvantages we have, right, is that God is not here, physically here. He is in spirit here, but he's not, walking up the aisle. He doesn't come sit beside you and say, "Hey, Darren, how's your day going today?" We can't see him. So God is our family. God is our church. God is all the people that can extend his love to us. That's what the image of God is. So Lyle, that's a great comment. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else want to talk about what they feel like the image of God is? What does it mean to be created in the image of God? It's a great quote from Education that says that one of the things that we're created is that we're created in the image of God with the power to think and create, which we can create, right? We create our children, we create art, we create music, we create lots of things because God is the creator and he's made us in that image. Darren.
You stole part of my thunder.
Oh, sorry.
One thing I was going to say was just having creativity, but also personality. We're all unique individuals, and we think for ourselves. We think we have perspectives that the rest of the animal kingdom does not have. And so that's part of the image of God.
All right, great. So yeah, so creativity, personality, love. Great. Okay, August, Becky behind you has her hand up.
I think it also means that we're created as human beings, not monkeys or birds or something.
Okay, so it's interesting to speculate, right? Because I mean, we don't know what God looks like as a person, except that we do have some descriptions in Ezekiel and in Daniel and in Revelation of God being at least appearing to us in the form that He wants to appear. But so if you look in Revelation, if you go to Revelation chapter 1. And chapter 1, verse 12, we have a picture of Jesus in heaven after going back to heaven. And it's pretty cool. I mean, it says that standing in the middle of the lampstand, starting verse 13, was someone like the Son of Man. He was wearing a long robe with a gold sash across his chest. His head and his hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like flames of fire. His feet were like polished bronze refined in a furnace, and his voice thundered like the mighty ocean waves. He had 7 stars in his hands and a sharp two-edged sword from his mouth, and his face was like the sun in all its brilliance. So there's a description of God. Ezekiel has one. Daniel has one. So we sort of know what God looks like a little bit. Not in great detail, but a little bit, right? And so then we assume that humans were created, like the Genesis says, in the image of God. And whether that's the real physical image of God, whether it's the character image of God, the character traits that Becky and Lyle and Darren have talked about, those character traits then are to give us the image of God. There's a quote, if you could put my first slide up. There's a great quote from the book Education. Some of you may know, I started off my career, first 9 years out of college, as a teacher. Taught at the Adventist school in Des Moines. Becky and I taught together for 5 years. Loved teaching together. And so we got to know this little book really well. If you want to get a sense of what the education that we need to give for our kids should be like, this book Education is something that I just strongly recommend, highly recommend. It's really got good stuff in it. And Ellen White talks about this whole idea of the image of God. And she talks about what this is. So, to restore in man the image of his maker, to bring him back to the perfection in which he was created, to promote the development of body, mind, and soul, that the divine purpose in his creation might be realized. This was to be the work of redemption. This is the object of education, the great object of life. So, I was thinking about that a lot. I was thinking about us teaching. And one of the things that we did with our students, Becky and I, when I went back to teaching after being away from it for about 12 years, we took over a school that was that was a challenge. Let's put it that way. Enrollment was down. Discipline was, the kids were jumping out the windows of the classroom. Because the discipline was really grim and the kids weren't doing anything academically, because academics and discipline were down, the enrollment was down because the parents didn't have a lot of faith in the school. And so the finances were a mess because there weren't enough students. So it was kind of went into it with our eyes open, knowing that there was a lot of work to do. And we said that we were going to set 4 goals. And the goals were discipline leading to self-discipline, strong academics. And the next two, I think, are appropriate for what we're talking about today. The third one was that we wanted our kids to learn compassion for each other because we believe that that's what God is like. And we knew that would be the case if the kids were doing things. So we had a time then when the upper grade kids then were volunteering to go tutor the lower grade kids and go to recess with the lower grade kids and to, just do things like that. And then the last thing was we wanted every kid to have the opportunity to meet Jesus. That was really, really important to us. And so that really fits with this man in the image of his maker to bring him back to the perfection in which he was created. That is that's sort of the ultimate aim of education. That's why our church spends big bucks at Midland Adventist Academy. Midland Adventist Academy has I'm on the finance committee. I didn't realize how much. It's $1 million+ budget a year, right, for Midland. I have one of my fellow school board members here, and it's over $1 million a year that we spend both in tuition, and our churches contribute heavily to that, and we spend $1 million a year because we believe that to restore in the image of his maker. Image of God in people is the object of education. So is it worth it? Is it worth it to spend $1 million? I see heads shaking. I think so. I'm going to be substitute teaching Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday next week. It's substitute teaching math, and I'm not sure that's the smartest thing I volunteered to do in a while. So I got to spend some time with Mrs. Allen, who's the math teacher in the high school at Midland. And what a dedicated person. And the teachers have a load this year. I want you to pray for Midland this year because the teachers, most of the time when you're a teacher, you get to sit in your classroom and you get to stay in your classroom all day. And so all the stuff you need, the books and the papers and the files and the stuff is all right there. And because of COVID, we want to keep the kids in place, and so we move the teachers. And so after she gets done with her first period, she's got to take her keyboard, take her mouse, take the wireless things out of the computer, put them on a cart, take her books, haul it to another classroom, set up for that, and then do that thing, and then go to another classroom. So she's moving like a nomad all day long. And then even her planning period, she can't be back in her classroom because somebody else is using it. So she's got to go to a little cubicle in the computer room and try to get all her stuff done. And if she needs a book or something from her classroom, she's got to go all the way down to her classroom. And then she's got to spend a period a day cleaning all the desks off with disinfectant. So the teacher's load this year is, I'm guessing, about 30% more than normal. So please pray for our teachers at Midland. Okay, if we got the next slide, let's talk about redemptive education in the Old Testament. There are, 39 books in the Old Testament, and they are filled with opportunities to learn. And I've just really picked out, I was trying to decide what were the most valuable educational lessons in the Old Testament. It was hard to sort it out because there's so many education lessons in the Bible, starting with Genesis chapter 1 and ending with Malachi. But anyway, we want to talk about this a little bit. And so there's this list of very familiar Bible characters up here: Abraham, Joseph, Moses, David, Solomon, and Daniel. What would you think about these people? And the question I have for you is, what lessons did each of these people learn? What was at least one lesson they learned from God during their lifetime that helped to make them more like God, to bring back the image of God in each of these people? Let's start with Abraham. Who would like to mention something that Abraham learned in his walk with God? I'm sorry, here, would you grab the mic? Because we need to have the mic because the people on TV need to hear your comments. So thank you.
obedience to God.
Okay, learned obedience. When was the time that he learned obedience? Maybe it was...
I think it's since God called him to get out of his people and go.
Okay,
he went.
yes.
He went and he followed. He made a lot of mistakes. He wasn't perfect. But one of the things, he always obeyed God. You know, and for me, this stand in each of those people. You know, sometimes we make mistakes, but obey God is the key to follow, you know.
All right,
to be
great.
successful.
Hey, great, thank you. So think about this, okay? How many of you have moved before from one state to another? Okay, so, yeah, Becky raises her hand because, so I was a hospital administrator, some of you know, and I worked for a company, and we were buying a bunch of hospitals, and my job was to get a new hospital that we bought, be there for 2 years, get it up to where it was supposed to be, then go to another hospital. And so I did that in Texas and Oklahoma and Washington State and Missouri, and so we moved a lot. And so think about, so you're Abraham, right? And God says to you, okay, Abraham, I want you to load all the stuff in the moving van, or you go rent some U-Haul trucks, pull them up to your garage, load all your stuff in the truck, and then go to a place that, by the way, when you get out to the interstate, I'm going to tell you whether to go north, south, east, or west. Okay? No realtor, no going to buy a house, none of that stuff. He just says, go to a place after which I will show you. Wow. So, and how many of us would go, yeah, God, I'm okay with moving if I have to, but where? I mean, do I need to take the winter clothes? Do I need to, if we're going to Hawaii, I'm good with that. If it's North Dakota, maybe we need to talk. So obedience. What else? What's another lesson? How about when God wakes Abraham up at 2 o'clock in the morning and goes, hey, Abraham, I want you to take your son that you waited 100 years for. I want you to take him to Mount Moriah, 3 days walk away. I want you to go up the mountain. I want you to build an altar. I want you to take a knife. I want you to cut his throat. Bill, that would be tough. That'd be tougher than moving without knowing where I was going.
Yeah, that would be difficult, but we do realize that was at the end of his experience and not at the beginning, that God took him through a lot of experiences to educate him about the necessity of obedience no matter what. And he waited and he wondered, maybe God would show him something else. He got no other vision. Do what I said. And he finally said, he didn't even tell his wife.
Yeah, which was smart.
Because he said, she's going to try to talk me out of this. But he knew it's what he had to do. But what we learned, a major lesson all through the old covenant system, they learned that their God is the creator God who creates everything, and the heathen always worship nature. They say, you're worshiping nature that God creates, and we worship the God who created nature, and we're still in the same scenario today because people will worship man and man's ideas and man this, and as Seventh-day Adventists, we point out, the Sabbath to us indicates the God we worship is the creator God, and that's all down through the Bible. And while we can be like him, we cannot be him, and we can reflect. So it's just as important for us to teach people what God is not as much as it is what God is. Okay. And so we need to make sure we cover both sides.
Great, thank you. So that's a good point, Bill. God lets us grow, right? Because if Isaac had been born when Abraham was 30, and then God would have said, "Hey, Isaac, we're going to go off," he might have had a different reaction. Remember when Abraham went down to Egypt? Remember that little detour off of God's path when he goes to Egypt? And he says to Pharaoh, he says to, first of all, Sarah, wow, you're a beautiful woman, and I don't know if we tell anybody that you're my wife, then somebody might kill me and take you away, and that's been going to work. So how about we tell you tell people you're how about my sister? Actually, he was his half sister, so that's kind of a half lie, right? My parents used to, because I tried it on my parents, right? Well, that was just a half a lie, and they said, no. A lie, a little bit of a lie is all a lie. So what does Abraham learn there? What is God trying to teach him there? Abraham goes down and says, "This is my sister," and Pharaoh goes, "Well, then good. She can join the harem since this is good. We'll take a beautiful woman into my harem." And then, God shows up to Pharaoh and says, "You're a dead man." Pharaoh goes, "What?" And he says, "You got Abraham's wife." And he said, "I didn't know." And God said, "I know you didn't know, and that's why I'm not going to do anything to you. But the reason that all your women in your court haven't had babies is because I've stopped up their wombs, and they're not going to have any babies until you take care of getting this woman out of your harem." So what was God trying to teach Abraham during this? Because God teaches us, for men, for me, it's a really good thing. God teaches us more from our failures, I think, than our successes. So what do you think? What's God trying to teach Abraham in this? Yes, over here, August.
I think God is trying to teach with all of the people, Old Testament, New Testament, and in our lives, that we need to trust Him.
Yeah. So if Abraham had said, "God, look, I know my wife's beautiful, but we're going to Egypt where you obviously want me to go, and so I'm going to trust you," certainly God would have taken care of him. So thank you. And trust is anybody here have a challenge with trust? Boy, I do. God, I know I'm supposed to do that, but looks tough. I don't know. So, all right, let's go to Joseph. Joseph is, and we're not told much about Joseph in Scripture before he ends up being sold by his brothers. But Ellen White gives us a kind of a look into Joseph. What kind of kid do you think Joseph was before he got sold into Egypt?
A little selfish.
Yeah, a little selfish. Probably a lot selfish. Think about it. What kind of coat does his father give him? Okay, coat of many colors, which signified that Joseph was going to be the heir. Yeah, he's going to be the heir. This is signified that Joseph's going to have the birthright. Okay, so how many guys are in front of the line for the birthright before Joseph? There's 10, right? Because there's 12 brothers altogether, right? And there's one younger than Joseph, right? There's Benjamin. So there's 10 guys in line. And what do they think about this guy in this cool robe that's going to be the ruler over everybody? What do they think? They like it? No. Okay, they don't like it at all, right? Okay, so then what does Joseph then do? He has dreams, right? Does Joseph keep the dreams to himself? What does he do?
Tells his brothers.
Yeah, what does he do? Nah. Guess what? I had a dream. And I had 2 dreams. I had a dream that all these sheaves were out in the field, and I was one of them, or there were 12 of them, and all of a sudden 11 of them bowed down to the one sheaf, and I was the sheaf that stood up, and all the rest of you bowed down to me. I'm sure that went over. So I had a little brother. There's 2 brothers in our family. And I had a little brother. And I had a smart aleck little brother, probably kind of like Joseph was. And I remember him just irritating the fire out of me before. And I can imagine Joseph doing this to his brothers, and there's big stakes here, right? The birthright of Jacob was a big deal, because Jacob was a very, very wealthy man. And so, the guy who's going to get 2/3, and the rest of the third gets split between the other 10, 11, becomes a lot less. So Joseph's got this. Joseph, and then they have the sun, moon, and 11 stars, and they bow, and even his father goes, "Are you kidding? You're saying that your mother and I and everybody else is going to bow down to you? What are you thinking?" It's been partly Jacob's fault, right? Because he gave him this coat and favored him, and so between Joseph's inherent selfishness as a kid, bratty little kid, and Jacob's favoritism, it was a mixture that ended up getting him sold into slavery. So anyway, Ellen White says that as he's on his way down to Egypt, he can see his father's tents off in the distance. You think about that. Joseph is probably, give or take, about 17 years old at this point. Been raised to be a very pampered son of a very rich man. And he's going down to Egypt, and what he can see out there, and he knows if he can scream and yell maybe loud enough, somebody would come, Jacob and his boys come riding across the plains, and his servants to come and rescue him. But he can't call for help. And what does he, Ellen White tells us that as he's going down to Egypt, he purposes in his heart that he's going to leave that stuff behind. And he's going to serve God whatever it takes. So what happens when he gets to Egypt? He becomes a what? A slave? Yeah, spends a lot of time as a slave. Bill, and then I want to talk about a little bit about this ultimate temptation that he faces.
Yeah, one thing we learned through the Old Covenant experience they had, they bungled their way through in their relationship with God, just like we do, but they didn't give up. And they kept on and they kept on, and God worked with them. And that's an important lesson, because Jesus says, he that perseveres unto the end, the same shall be saved. And we go through parallel experiences. We kind of bungle our way through and make this mistake and that. But we're supposed to mature at least a little bit, like Joseph did. And he finally said, I don't know what the outcome is, but I make a commitment to the God of my father, and I will be loyal to him. Boy, and I mean, he got down to Egypt, and we see the things he went through, and we saw the final outcome. Pretty cool.
Yeah, Joseph is my two favorite Bible characters, aside from Jesus, are Daniel and Joseph. Because they just, they're such an example of if you just decide absolutely that you're going to follow God, God is going to bless you. He may not make you like the governor of the kingdom, but he's still going to bring you through whatever. So talked about Joseph a little bit. Let's talk, so we don't run out of time. Let's talk about Moses. So we have Moses. Does Moses grow up in a poverty family and doesn't have enough food to eat and all that? Where does he grow up? Grows up in the palace, right? Joseph is supposed to be the heir to the throne. Remember, in those days, Egypt is the most powerful kingdom on earth by orders of magnitude. Probably maybe some discussions about some, China being its power, but in the Middle East, Europe, Asia, Africa, the most powerful kingdom by far is the kingdom of Egypt. And Moses grows up, he's going to be the next king of Egypt. What do you think? What lessons did he learn as a kid as he was growing up that weren't good lessons to learn? Bill.
Yeah, we have to be aware of Hollywood. They pretend like Moses didn't know who he was. His first 12 years, he was raised by his mother. When he knew who he was. He didn't think, well, I don't know who I am. I didn't know I was an Israelite. He was 12 years old before he was ever taken to the palace. So we need to recognize part of his problem was trying to identify, well, how do I play my role here? And I love the part where he chose to suffer affliction with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. And boy, could have he ever had it made if he'd have taken the kingship.
Yeah. Okay. August, Darren over here. So that's that. So it's a good point. So his mom raised him, but he had some bad habits that he learned. So let's see, Darren.
So Moses' life was kind of split up into three parts. And I think of the first one as him learning leadership. The next one, humility, when he was out in the desert with the sheep. And then patience, when he was leading Israel. And through all of that, he messed up horribly. I mean, leadership, and he goes and kills somebody and then has to flee for his life. Patience. Yeah, he did okay with the sheep, we assume. But, through his leading of Israel, where he was struggling with that, and in humility as well, all the way up until the end. And yet God still took him as his own. And we think that we have to get everything all worked out in our lives, whatever time we have, and yet God works with us, and as long as we don't give up, I think that's the key theme here, not giving up, pursuing God regardless of our failures.
Yeah, and one of the things Moses, thank you, Darren, and that's a really, we'll come back to that point in a second, but if you look at Moses really, from the time he was 12 until the time he was 40, I think is how old he was when he had to flee from Egypt, he learned to depend on himself. Right, so that's who he. I'm going to be I'm the crown prince. I'm going to be leading this nation. Yeah, and he did learn all the stuff that you talked about, leadership. So he learned about all the organizational structure stuff, which he needed to learn when he got ready to take 2 million Israelites from Egypt across the desert. But he really, that would think about that when he killed the guy, and then he dug the hole in the sand and buried him. He was depending on himself. He said, well, God's called me to do this, so I better set things right now. And then, as Darren said, then he has to learn humility as a shepherd. How many of you ever have a chance to work with sheep? Lyle, what are they like to work with?
Kind of a dumb animal.
Yeah, kind of a dumb animal. I have a friend who has sheep, and he raises border collies. Mainly he has a sheep because his border collies. And he said, sheep get up every morning and say, how can we die today? And we kind of do that as humans, right? We get up in the morning and say, all right, how can we mess up? What can we get in trouble with today? How can we drive these pieces of metal down the highway at 75 miles an hour? And, we as people do the same thing. That's why what does Isaiah say? We all like sheep have gone astray, everyone to his own way. Just watch sheep. They are there and there and there and there, and they don't want to go where the shepherd does, and we're like that. And Moses learns that, and then Moses, what a guy to be able to with God's leading, take 2 million people across the desert. I don't. It just boggles my mind. And he doesn't get to go in the land of Canaan because he has one big mess up. But he gets to go later, right? Gets to go, so finally gets to go stand on the top of the mountain for transfiguration and comfort Jesus before the cross. So he gets to go there eventually. God says, okay, Moses, it's been long enough. You can finally go to Canaan and take a look around. So, okay, David. What does David learn? And the thing we have about David is that we know more about the life of David than any other single Bible character. There's more time, more scripture devoted to the actual acts and consequences of the acts of David than any other one Bible character. We know about him as a young man and as a as working in the court of Saul, and working in the having to flee for his life for years, and then becoming king of Judah, then becoming king of Israel, and we know a huge amount about David. In fact, what's the name of that author that written those David books? She's written a whole series which is kind of covers the life of David, and she makes a lot of stuff up, and but it's interesting reading. But David's life is a real open book. What do we learn from the life of David? What does David learn in his life, Lyle? So many things you could pick out. But if you think about the highlights, what does David learn in this school of redemption?
You said there's many things. He got his life in a real mess there for a while, but what I think I remember the most about him is he had a repentant spirit when he was confronted with it. That's what I remember the most about him.
Yeah. Yeah, he could mess up, but he would always come back to God. And I think that's why God calls him, what does God call him? A man what? After God's own heart. Okay, and you think about the things that David did and the mistakes he made and the some of the treacherous things that he did. Even toward the end of his life, he does this, anyway, it's just off time after time after time. And he goes, God, I have just messed up. You read Psalms 51, where he's pleading with God to forgive him and bring him back into fellowship with him after the Uriah and Bathsheba incident. We won't take time to talk about Solomon and Daniel because we're going to run out of time to get through anything else. But anybody, have you read the book of Ecclesiastes? If you haven't read it in a long time, read it. It will depress you really fast, because here's Solomon, and at the end of his life, he's going, let me tell you all the ways that I messed up, and here's all the ways that are just useless.
Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books because it teaches us right away that great wealth brings great temptation. And he followed God well for 10 or 20 years. He slowly but surely wandered farther and farther and farther, to the point he was so far out there, he almost committed the unpardonable sin. And he finally says, I get it. Right. All is vanity. I was born in sin. I'm a sinner like everybody else. I've let all this wealth and power. And he writes all kinds of instruction for us to avoid it. And I thought, the only thing we ever learn is to go through the same experience on some level and then finally learn the lesson for ourselves. But what we learn is a tremendous amount of wealth. It brings laziness and indifference, and boy, do we see that reflected in our country today. We're reaping the benefits of parents and grandparents and people that work day and night just to secure livelihood, and here we kind of lollygag along, most of us most of us have at least adequate,
Right.
And now we see, wow, we're really coming to a point of total chaos and confusion over the issue of Christianity and all the rest of that in our country. And wow, are we confronted with the final things that are going to happen to force people to make a decision? Are you going to go by the Bible or are you not? And that's the final issue.
Right. Thank you. Okay, let's go to the New Testament real quick. If we go to the next slide, please, Mark. And so to say that Jesus is the ultimate teacher is a huge understatement. And so it was actually very difficult to just pick out the few sort of what I think are some of the highlights of his being a teacher, because every moment, what was he called? What was the title? What did people call him? Rabbi, right? Jesus called Rabbi. That was what everybody called him. His disciples called him that. The women who followed him called him that. The Pharisees called him that. Everybody called him teacher, teacher, teacher. So he's called over and over. So Jesus the teacher. So let's look at John chapter 3, and you all know the story. Nicodemus comes and visits Jesus at night. Doesn't want people to know that he's that he has an interest in this Galilean rabbi who's from the hills of West Virginia, and so he comes to talk to Jesus. And what is that conversation? What does this conversation with Nicodemus tell us about Jesus as a teacher? You all know the story. He comes and he has this conversation about being born again, and Jesus says you can't be born again, and Nicodemus says, well, what do you mean born again? And Nicodemus knew, because that was a common saying in Judaism. When you became a Jew from something else, you were born again. He said, I can't go back into my mother's womb, and he said, you have to be born by the water and the Spirit. He said the wind blows wherever it goes, and you can't hear the wind, and can't tell where it's going from, and so that's why you can't explain how people are born of the Spirit. So, and he said, well, how are things possible? How are these things possible? And Jesus says, look, you're a respected rabbi, you're a respected teacher. I mean, you don't understand. And so then he goes on to tell him that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. He goes on to tell him and really explain the gospel to him. What does this little story tell you about Jesus as a teacher? Yeah, but we got to hear for the folks who were at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I noticed that Jesus was very patient with Nicodemus, and a good teacher will be a patient teacher.
All right, thank you. Becky, would you comment on that whole idea of being a patient teacher? Becky was a teacher for 30 years, and in grades, actually, pre-K through 9th grade. I taught some college classes too, so has kind of done it all. But 1 year she taught, 3 years she taught junior high, public school junior high, special education, behavioral disordered kids in a prison town. Okay, so that's about as hard as it gets for being a teacher. Talk about talk about patience as a teacher.
Patience is really important. And when I was teaching in Moberly and had learning disabled, behavior disordered students, it was really a tough job. I'd go home and have a hard time going to sleep at night. But I had to be patient. And from being patient, the kids really responded to that. I had one child come to me and tell me that what she did in other classes and how she acted to the teacher and everything. And I said, why do you do that? And she said, what I don't understand is why do I do what you ask me to do? Because I don't for any other teacher. But patience pays off.
And so this is a little girl, and I want you to talk about this girl because one of the things that Becky kept trying to do, and this girl's 13, right? So Becky kept trying to just because she talked about all the stuff that she did, and Becky would say, I don't want you to do that. You don't need to get pregnant. You're 13 years old. You don't need to be. And so like 3 years later, she's now 16, she sees Becky in the supermarket and...
She came to me and she said, I didn't ever get pregnant.
So yeah, so that patience, fulfills out. Back in the back, August?
For Jesus, the work of the education, it was going together with the work of the redemption. And this is what it stands for me. Till now, when we work with anybody, you work for educate people, but to redeem people to Jesus. This is the most important thing for me. Thank you.
It is. I wish I could show you Becky, do you have that thing? And you want to hand it to me? So you're not going to be able to see this very well, but that's okay. So when Becky and I left Sunnydale, when I left Sunnydale, the home and school leader, who was wonderful, did a little book, and it said, I remember Mr. Barts. And so I had this kid named Greg. Greg was good at filling up his cup of iniquity. Greg was a second grader. Greg was a neat little kid, but came from a really tough home and really, tough background. And he just had no self-control and no, And so this is back before you jump on me about being an evil teacher. This is back in the days when Missouri allowed corporal punishment. Okay, so it was just time for him. Nothing else was working, and it was time for him to get a spanking. Okay, so I don't know if you feel about that or not, but just bear with me. So anyway, I spanked him, and I'd spank him a lot, enough to raise the dust. But when he writes, the kids all did this list of stuff that they remembered, and then they did a little drawing. So here's this drawing that he does. So after I spanked him, then I held him and we prayed together, and he, so in his list, he goes, I remember Mr. Barts telling me to do good, taking me to PE and gymnastics, giving me a spanking, praying with me afterwards, giving me a hug and holding me. Okay, so here's the cartoon, or not the cartoon, the drawing that he did. So here you can see he's over my knee and he's getting kind of what he deserved. And then here's where I'm hugging him. And then here he says, please help Greg, because we're praying about it. And then at the end, right, he writes, it's hard for me to talk about it, to choking up, I love you. And this is Greg Gibson. So this was about redemption. You know, I wasn't spanking this kid to punish him. I wanted him to be redeemed from this, you know, help with this anger, flying off, disobedience. And he really, and more the work of his first and second grade teacher, third grade teacher, who was really a gifted teacher. He really was transformed by being at the church school, from where he started off to at the, you know, at the end of his time. I remember as I was leaving, he said, he was from Tennessee, and he had come to our school in Missouri, and he said, Mr. Barts, when I get bigger, because he was a real truck car kind of guy and came from the real truck and car family. Mr. Barts, when I get bigger, I'm gonna buy you a monster truck. So this is a kid that got closer to redemption from what we had done. Bill.
Yeah, one of the major lessons we learned with the situation with Nicodemus is this. Nicodemus, you're born a sinner like everybody else, and you're no better than the Gentiles that you think you're better than. And that's very hard for us to understand. Well, I didn't do nothing wrong. How come I'm born a sinner? It's not my fault if I'm a sinner. And we justify our sins. Well, it's not my fault. God says to you and me, it may not be your fault you're a sinner, but if you're not saved at last, it is your fault, because I give you free opportunity to accept Jesus, my Savior. So you may be lost at first without any choice on your part, but if you're lost at last, it's your own fault.
Yeah. Said that. Yes, Lyle.
I think one of the other advantages of our Christian schools is, like you said, is the patience that the teachers have with them in public school. They just pass them right on through, you know. But a lot of the slow learners, they'll take the patience to help them, you know, and they turn out to be some of the best students, you know, and reach their full potential where otherwise they don't. So I think that's a good advantage of our school, too, is the patience the teachers take to work with the slow learners, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes patience to be a teacher. Probably why I quit doing that after a while, because I sort of running out of patience. So we just only have about 2 or 3 minutes left. And so if you look at the teaching examples that we brought out here, you know, sending out the 12 disciples, Jesus doesn't just say, hey guys, out and go get started. You know, they've already been with him for about a year, and they've watched him every day, and then he sends them out, and he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go do this, I want you to do this, I want you to do this. And by the way, I'm not going to send you by yourselves. I'm going to send you 2 by 2, so that you have somebody to help encourage you. When one of you gets down, the other one's going to be able to help lift them up. And he did a really nice job of teaching them what he was supposed to do. You look at John chapter 5, and if you want to see, if you have this idea that that the life of Jesus was easy, read John chapter 5 and then chapters 7 through 10, and look at the battles that he went through in the temple when he was talking to the priests and the rulers and the Pharisees during that time. It was a battle to the death. And in fact, they were going to stone him 2 or 3 times during that time, and he slipped away from them. They told him to arrest him, and he walked away and wasn't arrested. I mean, it was a tough battle for Jesus during that time. So, and I think about that, and I think about the courage that Jesus showed during that time. Also, an example of when you have to teach, when you have to do that, then to show courage. He taught in parables. If you look at the parables, all these famous parables that we know about, the Good Shepherd, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the sower, the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, you think about all those parables that Jesus used, and then what he did. And then his last, his signs at the end. How much poorer would we be as people if we didn't have Matthew 25, where Jesus said, hey, by the way, let me open this curtain. Here's what's coming at the end. There's going to be all this stuff happening. There's going to be these things happening, but don't be worried because it's just the birth pangs. And then more of these are coming and more of these are coming. But in the end, I'm with you always, and don't be afraid because the Son of Man is going to come in this clouds with power and great glory. So he gives us comfort to know what's coming in the end. How would you like to be facing the times we're facing now without Matthew 25? It's cool because you know the end of the story. You know the last chapter. You've read it. You know that it's not all about COVID. Okay, if we could skip the next slide and go to the last one, please. Okay, so Ellen White talks about, and this is a passage that pretty much every teacher, whoever teaches in Adventist education, hears over and over and over and over again. But it's a great, great passage, and it really summarizes kind of what the whole deal is, what the purpose is. She says, education is the harmonious development of the physical, mental, and spiritual powers. And it's to develop for two reasons. Prepare the student for service in this world and for the higher joy of wider service in the world to come. Have you ever wondered what we're going to be doing in heaven that's going to be service? I'm always interested in that. And I love that in Amazing Grace. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days than to sing God praise than when we first begun. What are you going to learn? One of the things that frustrates me about life is I don't have time to learn all the stuff I need to learn. And think you will not ever run out of time to learn everything you want to learn in heaven. And Ellen White talks about heaven is a school. Heaven is a school. Well, for some people that don't do well in school or haven't had a good experience in school, that isn't all that good a promise, right? They go, oh man, it's going to be diagramming sentences and doing, conjugating verbs and trying to figure out the difference between adverbs and adjectives and adverbs for eternity. Oh, maybe not. God's got some better things for us than that. So anyway, thank you for being a big part of your discussion today. Thank you for all of your comments. They've really taught me a lot and taught those around us a lot. So let's pray as we finish. Lord, thank you for what you brought to us today. Thank you for all the opportunities in Scripture for us to learn what kind of teacher you have been and are and the kind of things that you want us to learn. And we ask that you will help us today to be good learners. In Jesus' name, amen.